Sunday School. We're in week 2 of our series on biblical stewardship and how we should handle things, particularly in the area of our finances. We'll do a brief recap here of what we covered last week. First, we covered what is biblical stewardship, and our definition was a person who recognizes that everything we have is God's and we are managers of it, managers who are expected to manage it according to biblical principles. So our goal here is to find out how to manage our finances according to biblical principles. And we talked about the steps to financial freedom, and we only discussed one step last week, and that was the step of save $1,000 for an emergency fund. We talked about how to get this by not saving and paying the minimum balance on existing debt that you have, stop spending, sell something, use regular income, use irregular income, do what you need to do to get this emergency fund set aside. And I did forget to mention one thing regarding building your emergency fund, and that might not have been clear. You should not stop giving while you're saving up for your emergency fund. And giving is a believer's responsibility. Giving back to God what is rightfully His is not something only for when times are good, but it's also for when times are hard, and that includes the time when you're in debt and you're trying to get out of debt and you're trying to save $1,000 for your emergency fund. That is not a time to stop giving. It is a believer's responsibility. It is done in obedience. God's blessing is dependent on our obedience to Him. Obeying Him in the area of getting out of debt does not justify disobeying His commands concerning giving. Giving also shows an attitude of gratefulness. If you won't give now, you won't give ever. It's just how it works and how our lives work unless we repent. Giving isn't dependent on income. It is an attitude of gratefulness and obedience that should always be in our lives. And finally, it is a believer's desire. Even in hard economic times, believers who give will still give. And that's been shown in studies that they've done of giving, comparing giving during hard economic times versus giving during good economic times. People still give. And givers still give, and that should be the case with you. Matthew 5:23-34 says, "Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift." So the thing that your brother has against you, that could be a debt that you owe him. And the passage doesn't say, take your gift and take it to him, appease him, pay off the debt, pay the payment that you owe him. It says, leave your gift at the altar, go make it right, and then come and sacrifice your gift. And this is talking about more than just finances here, but I think you can make a financial application to it of you don't use your gift. You don't use what is designated for God to give to someone else who has a need of it, like to satisfy a debt. So now that we made that clear, you may recall that the last thing we talked about financially was the debt worksheet. And so then this week, we're going to use that for our next step to financial freedom. And our next step is get out of debt. Obviously, that's a very big topic, so we're going to take the entire class period and we're going to talk about getting out of debt. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. We don't want to strive to be rich, but we do want to get out of this servitude, this servant to the lender situation that we're in when we're in debt. If you aren't in debt, wonderful. Perhaps you can use this material to help someone else, or perhaps it can be used to help you mentally prevent yourself from getting into a state of debt. Or if you do get into debt, for whatever reason, to get out of it. And these steps will hopefully help you with that. Now, you may think people with lower economic status might be more prone to get into debt. Debt can come at any income level. It's not really related to income. In fact, people with greater incomes can actually become greater in debt because lenders are willing to loan them more money. So they can actually dig their hole of debt deeper than someone who doesn't have a lot of money or doesn't have those resources to back up the debt that they're getting into. With few exceptions, debt is a lifestyle choice that people make through their actions or their lack of actions. And I know no one wakes up and says, you know what, today what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get into debt. That just sounds like a great thing to do today. Let's go out and get it. Oh, no one says that. No one plans to get into debt or says, I want to do this. But people who end up in a debt, end up having debt, they don't budget. They don't consider whether they can afford something before they buy it. They spend based on their desires and not their needs. Instead of blaming their behavior, what they're doing, they may blame their employer. They may blame the economy. They blame the emergencies that come into their life. And really, ultimately, they're blaming God for their actions and what is happening in their life. Okay, so if we went around town and we just asked various people on the street, do you have debt? Do you have debt? Do you have debt? Okay, and we found 10 people who had debt. Shouldn't be too hard, walking around streets, busy streets, find 10 people have debt. And what we did is we paid off 100% of their debts. We said, okay, what do you owe? You owe this, you owe this. We have them fill out a debt worksheet for us. Okay, I'm going to write you a check for this one. I'm going to write you a check for this one. I'm going to write you all of them. We're going to take care of all their debts. And we checked back with them a year later. Very likely we would find that all 10 people were in debt again. Debt is a lifestyle choice. It's a way that we live. And when you don't break that pattern of debt and that reach into your wallet and grab a credit card and pay with it.
Is it considered an addiction?
It could be. It could be in some cases. It depends how it manifests itself. But yes, it could be. I don't think all of them are addictions, but I would think it would probably more apply to the thing that they're purchasing and not to... It's not an addiction to pull out the credit card necessarily, but it could be what you're pulling out of the credit card out for is the addiction.
Yeah.
And that could be anything. And it could be something that isn't necessarily in and of itself a bad thing. It could be...
shoes.
It could be shoes. We all need shoes. We have to have shoes on our feet.
Not 50.
But it could be a habit of whipping out the credit card to pay for the shoes every time, consistently, habitually. Okay, so we talked about the 10 people who would pay off all their debts, and we talked to them a year later, they're likely in debt again. Now, I just made that up. I don't have any studies that I've done. I haven't done that to 10 people. But I do have some other things that I can share. we could, if you think of lottery winners. Lottery winners are people who suddenly came into money and theoretically could have paid off all or at least part of their debts, depending on how much they won in the lottery. Well, there was a study done in 2010 comparing different lottery winners. And what they did is they had two groups. Group one was people who won between $600 and $10,000 in this particular lottery, whatever it was. I think it was in just Florida. Group two was winners who won between $50,000 and $150,000. So we have two groups. One group wins just a little bit. One group learns a considerable amount more, not enormous, not millions, but a considerable amount more. The interesting thing is that they found a correlation between these groups and the bankruptcies that occurred in 3 to 5 years after their winnings. And the interesting thing is that it didn't match what you would think. The more people won in the lottery, the more likely they were to be bankrupt 3 to 5 years later. It wasn't a staggering amount. It was 1%. They were 1% more likely. And I have the full study if you're interested in looking at all the gory details. But they found it more likely that they would go be bankrupt. And so that's not just not having the money that they won. They're actually back into debt so far that they declare bankruptcy.
Question: the 600 to 10,000 group, was that gift cards or was that actual cash that they won?
It was cash that they won.
It was all cash. Okay.
Yeah, and it was 600 because that's the amount at which they had to begin reporting it, and so they would actually have the data to look at. And it was the same type. They also compared bankruptcy rates before they won to make sure that they were similar and not skewed in any way. Different things like that. So it was a good study when I read the whole document that they did. Okay. Incidentally, this also explains why most welfare doesn't work. You give people money, it doesn't necessarily help them, and that study actually lends itself toward that as well. And while we're on the topic of lottery gambling, this doesn't even begin to address the depression, lack of trust, all the other problems that gambling creates. But what it does show us clearly is that debt is a way of life that cannot be solved by an infusion of cash. All right, now let's move on here. Don't start eliminating your debt until after you have completed step 1. So back when we were on our steps here, don't start step 2, getting out of debt, until you've completed step 1. Step 1 is essential to step 2. Save that $1,000. We want to break the habit of pulling out the credit card to pay for something, and even for emergencies. When you start paying off your debts and have an emergency fund, an emergency requiring the emergency fund, here's what you do. You immediately revert back to step 1. So you've got your emergency fund established. You've moved on to step 2. You're starting to get rid of your debts. Oh no, you had an emergency. Oh no, it was a $999 emergency. Step back to step 1. Build that back up to $1,000. Then go back to step 2 and reduce your debt and work on getting out of debt. We want to continually keep that emergency fund there and ready to take care of the emergencies that will come in our lives, and to prevent us from having to use the credit card to handle those things. All right, here are some things while we were getting out of debt that we should think about. Don't stop giving. I mentioned this earlier. You shouldn't do this for step 1. You also shouldn't do it for step 2. There are a lot of people in debt who don't give. But have you ever heard of someone who gave so much money that they gave so much money to God that they were in debt? I don't hear about people like that. Maybe you do, but I don't hear about people who give so much they're in debt. Okay, don't save money. In step 2, while we're getting out of debt, we're still not saving any money for other things. Of course, we talked about stepping back for the emergency fund to rebuild it, but we're not saving for anything else. Now, I will make a few exceptions here. If you have an employer-matched 401k or Roth 401k, whatever, those types of matching funds, I'm okay if you want to put money toward the match. Only toward the match, nothing more than the match, but I'm okay if you want to do that. Avoid severe penalties. And what I want to talk about with this point is if you already have money in a 401k or something like that. Some people think, I'm in debt and I want to get out of debt. I have this money over here sitting in this 401k, and I wouldn't necessarily say take the money out of that, because normally there are very severe penalties in doing so. You can lose a lot of the funds in doing so. And also, I also wouldn't suggest borrowing against that. You're just moving the problem from one place to another when you do that. You're not really solving it. And what that does is it removes the drive that you might have to get rid of your debt, because it temporarily solves it, and it solves it by postponing the problem toward when you might need those funds in that 401k, and they would no longer be there. And we'll talk about that more in the last lesson of the series. Okay, so avoid severe penalties. Don't consolidate your debt. Now this might go a little bit contrary to your thinking. You might say, but I have a high interest rate here and here, and I can get lower interest rates here and here, so wouldn't I want to put my debt over here and put it all under this lower interest rate umbrella so that I'm not paying as much on interest? Mathematically, that may make sense. But we're humans. We don't do everything. We're not a robot. We don't do everything based on math. We have emotions, we have wills, we have minds, we do things sometimes that don't necessarily make sense, and we do that a lot with money. Your problem with that debt isn't the interest rate, it's the debt. Your problem isn't that you have all these accounts that you need to take care of. Your problem is the debt in those accounts. All right, so I put together a little visualization of your debts. So I have 4 circles here, and each of the circles represents an account that someone has that is a debt account. Some debts are larger than others, but in this scenario we have 4 different debts. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about consolidating our debt. So someone takes and they consolidates their debt into one debt and has one interest rate, one account, so that they only have to deal with that. Well, what happens? What happens is we see one. We don't see multiples. We don't see lots of problems. We see one problem. And interestingly, that one problem looks smaller even though it has the same amount in it. So if I go back to our circles, I calculated and rounded the areas of these circles, and those are those values. So we have a total surface area in these circles of 8.9. That circle I gave you had an area of 12.5. Now you probably didn't think so. You probably thought I gave it the same area, but I didn't. And the same thing happens when we're thinking about our debt and when we consolidate it. It looks smaller even if it's the same size or even if it's bigger. Sometimes we'll consolidate our debt and then we'll take out a little extra for those things that we might not know about yet. And oh, I might have this to take care of and I might have this to take care of. So we'll take out a little extra and then we'll have taken on even more debt than we had before. We also might take it off for a longer period of time. It could be that the debts that we have, certain ones are due and they're due soon. But when we consolidate them, we may spread them out and make them take longer to pay off. And so we'll not help ourselves in the process of getting rid of those debts. And just so you can see, that circle there has an area of 12.5. This is the actual circle that has an area of 8.9. So you can see that's quite a difference when I switch back and forth from them. But this is the true amount of the debt that should have been consolidated, and helps you to see how our minds perceive things, and things look smaller when they're not spread out in quite as many different accounts. All right, now let's talk about how we should attack our debt. This is the process that we're going to go through to get rid of the debt. What is the mechanics of it? All right, last week we filled out the debt elimination worksheet, and we're going to use that this week. Last week we took the debts and we listed out all of our debts and the amounts we owed on all of those things. This week, what we're going to do is we're going to take that sheet and we're going to fill it out again onto a new sheet. I have a new sheet called a debt elimination worksheet, and it looks almost identical to the last one. It has the same accounts listed, current balances, monthly interest. That's all the same. What's different is how you fill this sheet out. Take the last sheet and you fill this sheet out listing your debts from smallest to largest by current balance. We want the smallest current balance first, then the next largest balance, then the next largest balance. And so the last item on your list should be the one with the largest balance. And if you don't have one of these sheets from last week, you can pick up two of the new one and just fill it out in whatever order you can on the first one, and then reorder it on the second one. Or if you're really good, you can fill it out in the proper order to begin with, if you're have that few accounts or that good of a memory. So the idea is, what we want to do is we pay the minimums on all debts except for the first. The first debt, that smallest one on the list, that's the one we're going to attack. That's the one we're going to use all of our extra available funds, all of those funds that we're getting through all these means that we talked some about last week, we're going to talk more about later. We're using all of those funds to attack that smallest debt, to get rid of it. We're paying the minimums that we can on all the other ones. Whatever the minimum that you're allowed to pay on those debts, that's what you're going to pay on the other ones. So we're putting all the money against the first. When the first is paid off, what you do is you take everything you were putting toward it, including the interest payments, and use that to pay off the second debt on the list. So we're rolling here, and we're gathering steam, and we're using everything that we were putting against that small debt. Now we're using all of that, and we're putting that against the next smallest debt on our list. And we're going to repeat that process until all of the debts are eliminated. And the next step is repeat there. Okay, so here's just a visualization using our little circles that I came up with earlier. The arrows above the circles represent how much money you're able to contribute toward those debts. Our smallest debt was the one on the far right, so we're putting the most amount of money we can against that debt, and we're putting minimums against the other ones. Some of them are going to have larger interest rates. That's why the one on the far left has a little bit bigger arrow than the others, because it requires a little bit larger minimum to take care of. So then after we pay off the first one, we'll be attacking the second smallest one there, but our arrow got bigger. We're able to now put more money against that next smallest debt. Then it gets even bigger when we attack that other debt, and then we have the biggest arrow, the most amount of money possible going toward eliminating our debt on that largest debt that we have. What this does is it helps you see success. You can see that, oh, I got this debt paid off. It's taken care of. I can do this. I can get out of debt. And then you have more funds available to take care of the next debt. And then you have more funds available to take care of the next debt. And it helps you keep that momentum going and keep you on the right steps toward eliminating that debt. Don't give up. There may be setbacks. You may have just started and have 2 months in a row where you have to pull out your emergency fund and you have to revert back to step 1 and build that emergency fund again. And then you get to the next month and you think, now I can start paying off debt, and you have another emergency and you have to. It's okay. We're on the right step. You're not creating debt. You're on the right step toward getting out of debt if you operate this way. Okay, so then the question comes up, should I have credit cards at all? And different people teach different things on this. Let's think about some things. Credit cards are tools similar to fire and electricity. Both things can be extremely useful and extremely dangerous. So, it isn't necessarily the tool, it's how we use the tool. Some people can't handle credit cards. For them, I absolutely recommend not to have credit cards. If you can't handle a credit card, don't have one. So then the question is, well, how do I know if I can't handle a credit card? So, how to know if you can't handle credit cards? Sign number 1. You use it as an easy loan, not an easy payment method. If it's a way to make a loan, not make a payment, that's one sign that you can't handle credit cards. If you have more than one type, if you have, now I have more than one type. I have a Discover and I have a Visa. I have the Visa because there are some places that won't take to the Discover. But why would you need more than one Visa? Everywhere that accepts Visa will accept Visa. You don't need more than one. You don't need more one Discover, MasterCard, etc. So that's a sign. It's not a ultimate determination, but it is a sign when you have more than one type. Sign 3. If you justify having them based on their rewards. Too many people are in debt because they want a free flight to go on a vacation that they can't afford. They're trying to earn up those sky miles or whatever so that they can take this trip and get into more debt. Not a good reason. And it's a good sign if you're justifying it based on those rewards. And, the interesting thing is those rewards generally come whether you hold a balance or not. They're tied toward putting money on the card, not toward when you take it off. So if you take it off immediately, you can still get those rewards. So it's not a good way to justify having the card or having debt, for that matter. Sign 4. You shop for credit cards based on rewards, interest rates, or maximum balances. If you're shopping for credit cards, that's a good sign that you can't handle them. Sign 5. And I'm not advancing these. Sign 5, and this is the big one. If you don't pay off the balance in entirety every month, you're using it as debt if you don't. You're not using it as a payment method. You're not using it as a tool. You're using it as a debt vehicle. And that's a very good sign. In fact, it is the ultimate sign that you can't handle a credit card. Your monthly payments towards your credit card, if you have one, should be automatic. Your bank account or your credit card, one of the two, should automatically pay off the credit card balance every month. Now, I know not everyone would necessarily trust a bank or whatever to do this. That's okay. It should at least be manually automatic. There should be no question in your mind when that bill comes for that credit card, I'm going to pay it off in entirety. It should just be automatic. You shouldn't even have to think about it every month. That's just how it should occur. That's what you should do. And you may have to work on getting out of debt to get to that point, but if you have that sign, that's a sign that you can't handle the credit card, and you should get rid of it. If you have any of these signs, you should destroy the cards. You can't handle them. All right, so then people have concerns. Oh, I don't have a credit card. Oh, now I'm not getting any reward points or flyer miles. Okay, that's not really that big a deal. The problem, removing your debt is more important. And I think this is kind of like my kids saying, I don't want to go to the dentist because they're going to give me a sticker when I'm done. Really? A sticker? You want to go to the dentist so you can get a sticker? Okay. That's what it sounds like to me if I heard someone say that they want to keep their credit card and their debt vehicle so that they can get those reward points. Some people might say, I need a credit card for some transactions. Well, you might have got away with that excuse at one time, but Visa check cards that withdraw funds from your bank account are accepted anywhere a Visa is. So you don't need a credit card. The Visa check card will do the job. And if you say, but there's this one place over here that doesn't take a Visa check card. They only take Discover. They only take American Express. You're justifying it for that one thing, one place that you probably don't need to purchase anyway. Not a good reason. I haven't seen any grocery stores or places that you would get things that you need from that aren't going to accept a Visa check card. I have seen places that won't. For example, I've been in Canada, and there's some places in Canada that would only take a MasterCard. They wouldn't take a Visa. But the interesting thing is they would take cash. And if I had cash, they would take that. And in fact, they would even take U.S. currency in a lot of places in Canada, not just Canadian dollars. So I don't think you can use that as an excuse. Okay. My credit rating. If I don't have a credit card, my concern is that my credit rating is going to be destroyed. And my answer to that is, isn't that great? That's exactly what we want to happen. And you're like, what? You want my credit? Yeah. You can't handle debt. if you can't handle debt, you can't handle credit cards, then I don't want you to be able to get into more debt. I want you to not be able to get in more debt. And not having a good credit rating is going to prevent you from getting into debt. You know, I've heard of people who are like, well, I'm trying to get this person out of debt. I'm trying to help them get out of debt, but I can't take away their credit cards because then it'll ruin their credit rating. And well, that's great because that'll help them not get into debt anymore. They won't be able to take out that new credit card and put more debt on it. Okay. Actually destroying your credit cards doesn't by itself destroy your credit. Your credit card company doesn't look around and say, do you have a credit card? Oh, I'm going to put a black mark on your account because you cut that credit card up. No, they're not going to do that. What it does prevent is it does prevent you the ability to continue to generate good credit rating. It's not going to hurt your credit rating, but it's not going to provide that information that allows them to see that your credit is improving. But you know what it also does is it also prevents you from having a credit card issue. It prevents you from having a late payment. If you can't put additional debt on your card, I guess it doesn't prevent it, but it does help you to not have a late payment on your credit card, which would further damage your credit. Now, you say, but I will ultimately need a good credit rating because if all of my, after I get out of debt, I'm going to want to buy a house. That's what I want to do. Or I want to sell this house and I want to buy another one. And in order to get that mortgage, I'm going to need some credit. Well, yes, I understand that. But if you are in debt and you can't handle credit cards, you have no business buying a house and getting a mortgage. We need to take care of that problem of debt, take care of that credit card problem first, and then we can look at getting a mortgage. And from what I've read, it can take about 7 years to build back good credit from various bad credit situations. So what needs to happen is you need to get out of debt, and then we can get a secured credit card for someone who can't handle credit cards. Get a secured credit card that is backed by real funds in a bank account. So even if you spend all of the money on the credit card, all of the funds are there in the bank account to take care of that credit. And so that's a good way for someone who can't handle credit cards to build their credit again so that they can then do something like get a mortgage on a house. Most people have a spending problem, not an earning problem. But most people think they have an earning problem and that their earning problem isn't their fault. If God wants you to provide for your family, and He does, then God will provide the means to do it. God's miraculous provision comes to those who are in His will, and those who are in His will are working. So, how to know if you have an earning problem? And where did I go with that? Yeah, causes of debt. Our causes of debt are earning and spending. Those are the only two causes. Not enough earnings, too much spending. That's what happens. That's how we get debt. Okay, how to know if you're having an earning problem. And I see I have very little time left and a lot of material here, so I'm going to speed through this. How to know if you have an earning problem. If you aren't laboring. Genesis 3:19 says, "In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread." If you think a person with no debt making minimum wage couldn't possibly make enough to meet their obligations. If you think I have to make more than minimum wage in order to meet my obligations, then you probably don't have an earning problem. You probably have a spending problem. In 2012, the U.S. poverty level, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, for a family of two was $15,130. Interestingly, if you take the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour and work 40 hours a week, you will make only $1.48 over that amount in a year. So my graph there shows two bars, and they're technically $1.48 difference, but you can't even see it because that's so small of a difference to show on the screen. I don't even know if it puts a pixel up above on one side over the other one. So you can earn the U.S. poverty level on the minimum wage. You don't need more than that. In case you think that that couldn't possibly be enough, consider that if you make this much, you are in the top 6.9% in the world. If you make the minimum wage, one person working 40 hours a week, you're in the top 6.9% richest people on earth. You would earn as much in a year as an average person in Indonesia does in 20 years. You could pay for a can of Coke in 6 minutes of working time. It would take the person in Indonesia 2 hours to pay for that can of Coke. And I didn't ask them I don't know what the can of Coke price was, so we'll just go with that. If you made minimum wage here in the United States, you could pay the salaries of doctors in Azerbaijan. How many doctors? Not one doctor. Not that many doctors. Not that many doctors. Not that many doctors. 66 doctors. Your salary, your minimum wage, 40-hour-a-week salary, could pay the wages, the salaries of 66 doctors in Azerbaijan. Okay, so we talked about if you think you're a person with no debt, getting minimum wage couldn't possibly pay off enough to meet your obligations. This is how you know you have an earning problem. The next way to know you have an earning problem is if you can't meet your obligations and begin paying off your debts in the near term. Focus there is on obligations and near term. Okay, so what if you have identified that you have an earning problem? What should you do? In the near term, you should look at increasing your hours or getting a second job. This is what you're going to have to do to take care of that in the near term. The long term, we can talk about career goals and finances, how you're going to develop your education and things like that. That's really beyond the scope of this course, and I'm out of time. Okay, so the causes of debt. We talked about earning and spending. So quickly, let's go over a few tips to control your spending. Learn to say no. Say no to friends who want to spend money. Say no to family who want to spend money. No to kids who want to spend money. And most importantly, say no to yourself when you want to spend money. Use lists. Don't go to the store without a list. That includes when you go to Lowe's and you want to buy 2 bolts. Put it on a list. Write it down. Go to the store. Buy what's on your list. Don't buy anything else. You say, but I saw that other thing that I need. Don't buy it. Go home. If you really need it, go home, write it on the list, go back. This is just a method to try to help you curb your spending habit. Get approval. Ask a spouse or ask a friend. Say, every time I want to buy something, I need to get your approval. And it doesn't have to be a, yes, I approve of that, or, you can even say, they can't say no. You know, they have to approve everything. But you know what? Just the fact that you wrote it down on a piece of paper and you showed it to them, you're not going to buy as much. Because you're going to have to do that, and it's going to make you think twice. It's going to put a time barrier between when you wanted to buy it and when you buy it. It's just something else to help you. Weight and price. Put a time period on everything. And maybe you set it at, I was trying to think of what normal expenses that we have for our needs, you know, outside of bills and such, but our normal expenses and what the maximum value is. I came up with a number of $20. If it costs over $20, I'm going to have to wait on it. Wait a week. Say, every time I find something I want to buy that's over $20, I'm going to write it down on a list and then write down the date, and in 1 week, that's when I can buy it, if I still want it then. If I still haven't put something else on the list that I want more. It's going to put a time barrier. Also, you could say, everything I see that I want to buy, I have to get 3 prices on. And not all 3 of them online. Find one in a brick and mortar store too. It puts an additional barrier of time, and it helps you know that you're getting the best deal on this thing that you want to buy. Put a time limit. Put a time limit on how long you can be at the store so that you won't linger at some things that you don't need. And you'll say, I got to get this and I got to get this, so I'm going to put a time limit on myself to make sure that I'm not in the store buying things or looking at things and that I don't need right now. And finally, another one is count your blessings. And here was just something else I thought of. Every time you want to buy something that you don't need, write out 5 things you're thankful for. Okay? And then you can go buy it. And then the next time you want to buy something that's just not something you need, write down another 5 things that you're thankful for. And this should be really easy. You should be able to just really, really, really fast. You should just be able to zip, 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 5 things. Okay, yeah. But you know what it'll do? It'll help you focus on being grateful for what you have rather than wanting things that you don't have. Pay with cash. And by that I don't just mean money that you have in the bank. I mean actual physical dollars. I don't like this. I don't like paying with cash. I don't like having money, physical dollars in my hand. But this will help some people. If you have physical dollars in your hand and you have to give them to someone, it helps you understand the value of the money. It helps you want to keep those and not give them away. And finally, budget. And this is something that we're going to talk about in the following 2 weeks. So we'll not talk about it today. All right, let's close in prayer. Dear Lord, I do thank you for how much in your word that you've shown us about our finances and about how we should handle them. I pray that you would use these practical tips to help people who are in debt to get out of debt, to remove that burden on their lives, we ask. Be with the service to come, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen.